Hello? All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I will talk hopefully less and enjoy the panelists more. But let me introduce myself. I'm Tara Walker. I work for Amazon Web Services, and I don't know, I build games on as well, right? So a little bit about me. I spent 12 years at Microsoft, and now I'm 4 years at Amazon. And throughout that time, I've been a software engineer. So I've had a career outside of those two, but that's my most recent experiences. And my developing in games has been kind of an inroads to, hey, yeah, I know we're building all this other stuff, but can I infuse this into a game? So I'm really pleased to be here and letting that part of the passion of my gig be a part to talk to these great panelists who do game dev for their life. So I would not be remiss to actually do this myself. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, because I'm not gonna do you guys justice. I just know it. So I'm gonna let you guys, wow them with who you are. All right, Yvonne, you wanna start?
Absolutely. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Yvonne Teveno, and I'm the founder of a company called STEM Kids NYC. So we actually take kids as young as 5 and start introducing them to coding concepts, all the way through to 12th grade. And I launched a coding boot camp in Harlem in February for 18 to 24-year-olds. I made my first game when I was 11. My dad introduced me to computer science when I was in 7th grade, and I made my first game. I went on to graduate with a degree in computer science, and all through high school was generally the only girl and the only girl of color or the only person of color. And that also went through to college. And I worked for companies like IBM, Computer Scientist Corporation, Morgan Stanley. So I've done a host of different things in UX design. I've led teams, major projects in Fortune 500 companies, and really have kind of honed my IT tech side to use my creativity to actually lead, to build solutions. That was kind of like my foray into corporate America.
Hi, everyone. How y'all doing? Good. So my name is Mary Martha Ford-Dieng, and I am the developer behind The Ultimate Clapback, which is my very first game. My background is actually theater production and management in higher education. I fell into game design. After moving my mother into a nursing home, dealing with elder care, I got really stressed out, depressed, filled with anxiety, and so I found myself a doctor, a better therapist, an even better antidepressant, and started to figure out how to channel that energy to really regain my mental wellness. And so I put pen to paper and learned how to use InDesign and Illustrator, and somehow I have a game that's right out there.
Hi all, my name's Patty Umali. I came to game development by way of international education, working in study abroad. I've found that there were so many young people out there who don't have access to traveling internationally or getting to formally study abroad. And so I was hoping to make something new that would help give those young people more access to different cultures and learning to hone their intercultural skills. And so I started Interintellectus, which is dedicated to making games and tech that teach intercultural skills, but also hope to represent cultures in their modern forms. Our first project is The Girl Who Sees. It's a 2D fantasy RPG about Filipino mythology, and it's set amidst the context of Japanese occupation in World War II Philippines. With the game, we're hoping to promote better representation of Filipinos in the media, and we're using our social presence to encourage members of the Filipino diaspora who are all over the world to better engage with indigenous Filipino culture, which isn't accessible to most people around the world. And so that's a little bit about me. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Pierre. Right now, I guess, I'm an indie dev. I live in Philly. I'm the project director of a group called Philly Game Mechanics. We're a charitable game collective. We have meetups, we have game jams. We're working with a couple museums, and our main objective is to give indie devs in the area, or any really dev in the area, opportunities to showcase their game, work on their games, become better at game development. I'm also the games manager this year for IndieCade, and I found my way through game development. Actually, I have a philosophy degree, but and I thought I was going to try and write about games, but I'm a terrible writer. So then I figured I should try and make something, and that's my short story.
What's fantastic about this, if you guys noticed, most of us came into games in a completely different way, and I think that's cool. So just before we even get into it, please take away from, no matter where you're coming at this game dev thing, there's a space that can be made for you, and I think that's fantastic. So with that, I know some of you guys have already shared your current projects, but I would love to dig into that really quickly. So would you start and just share what are your current projects, so they can just let you know what your game dev focus is right now, you're working on, before we kick off some other questions. Let's talk about your projects.
Well, my next game is going to be a board game, so I'll tackle that instead of a card game. Yeah.
You gonna tell us what it is, or you?
Well, I'm still working out the mechanics of it, but the working title is "You're Not Invited to the Cookout."
Okay, already I want to play. So.
I really hope there'll be some kind of Godzilla barbecue Becky making an appearance.
I mean, well, yes.
They gotta have the right
Pool party
potato salad if they make it. Okay.
Yeah, because
No
you put
raisins
raisins
in
in
the
the potato salad.
okay.
Yes. Move back 5 spaces.
All right, Sean, I'm gonna pick on you because you're on the end. What's your latest gig thing you're working on?
A few projects. I'm working on a musical puzzle game, and I'm working on a game that's a podcast. So you have to listen to it, and you have to vote on what the investigator. It's like an investigation podcast, similar to maybe a serial or something. And you have to listen to episodes, vote on what the investigator does next. Episodes take a while to come out because I need a lot of help. And also working on, I don't know if this will ever be released, but it's a roguelike game using the Amazon Echo device. We have to speak to it.
So I need to talk to you after this, right? Okay, I like that. Go ahead.
So working on those are the things I have up in the air right now. They're fun and they're a bit different, and I don't know how well they'll do, but it's fun to do it. So.
All right.
And I'm not personally working on any games at the moment, simply because I'm putting all my time and energy into having a STEM camp to teach kids how to make the games. And so we just started this this Monday, but past games that my students have either wireframed, because I even introduced wireframing to my 5s and 6s. So just to really get into that imagination and simply understand the whole importance of wireframing. I never wireframed before in my life when I was coding. I simply just stayed in the lab and got it done. But now that I'm an older person and more disciplined, and actually when you work for a company, it's important that you make sure that your code is more efficient because it's going to cost them. So I learned how to wireframe it as an adult, but now I teach my students through just to help them through planning. So some of the games that they've created last year and throughout the school year, because we have a school program, has been games that have, in a sense, there was one that I loved in particular where there was a group of my girls, my tech girls, did something around beauty, and it was almost like a counter narrative to beauty, so that they could really, it was like a social media game that they could really, it touched those girls who tended to be ostracized in society, but they had an answer for beauty in a very different way. So there was a social context to it, there was a friending context to it, there was different things, there was a channel that they could share kind of all of their talents, just to kind of take away from the aesthetics and the exterior side that society plays on beauty, but to also just to say, well, this is also beautiful. This is what I do is beautiful.
That is working on a game, though. You're empowering. I was like, she's selling herself short. Let me get in here. What are you talking about? That is working on a game. Patty, I know you shared a little bit about your game, but you want to kind of tell them your current project?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I'm working on The Girl Who Sees. We started full production. We ran an Indiegogo campaign last October that gave us enough funding to at least start production. And so we started this year. I've got a great blossoming team of about 12 Filipino and Filipino Americans and a couple of allies. And it's been, this is my first game that I'm making, and so it's been a roller coaster learning about producing and managing and getting all the teams to talk to each other. From a cultural standpoint, it's been really interesting doing the research and trying to be mindful about all of our terminology. The game also has a little bit of language learning. It teaches a little bit of Tagalog, which is one of the main Filipino dialects, and so that's certainly been, edutainment is kind of like a nasty word in game design these days, but trying to be mindful about incorporating that learning into the mechanics and keeping it fun, but also making sure people are learning something.
Oh, I mean, that's good. That's exceptional. So they get to do the fun stuff. Most of my games that I built is to spit it out. I'm on more of Yvonne's side. I literally build games so other people can build games. So that's kind of I'm a little jealous. You guys get to do more of the fun stuff than I do. But I want to talk about, and we kind of talked about this a little, so just to let you know, I've been lucky to kind of talk and chat with these great panelists prior to being on here. We talked about cultural representation in games, and we had a really good conversation about that. So I'm going to direct this first at you, Patty, but I know the rest of you guys obviously have very passion with that, so I would love for you to dig in as well. But I'll start off with you, Patty. Let's talk about building cultural representation in games and how important that is. And I know that's one of your passions, so I would love to kind of start with you and talk about that.
Great. So one thing that's been really important for me, I think, I chose to make a game about a culture with people of color because, we all know in this room that we're not represented enough. But it was also important to me to, even before I had picked which people and culture to focus the game on, I wanted to make sure that it would be in a context that is our modern selves, a modern portrayal of those cultures rather than ancient Philippines or ancient Egypt. I mean, if the only thing that you're seeing in the media is these ancient representations of people who live and work with you daily, you're not going to get that same experience of connecting with the characters and understanding the experiences of modern people of that culture. So that's been really important to me. And cultural representation in a game, certainly you would want many people and cultural experts giving input into the content of the game. So I think those are two big things that I care about.
Yvonne, I know you work, obviously your passion is about creating a school that represents persons of color and getting into game design. So I'm sure cultural representation, and as you're teaching these kids to be the next wave of developers around gaming, is important. Can you talk to us about cultural relevance as far as how you approach it?
Absolutely. And so I'm also a Zinkel Fellow at Teachers College, and what that really means is I get a chance to do some research, and my body of work is around developing culturally relevant STEM curriculum. So my kind of deep-seated passion is representation for sure, and I'm actually a product of the kind of learning how to code without much representation in front of me, but also specifically as I understand as an educator how the mind thinks in order to actually teach someone how to build their framework around computational thinking, their logic, and so on. I totally also get that there's software and teaching instruction that also needs cultural relevance. And meaning, if you have a student who has a preferred learning style from a particular culture, and then they go into a, say, school that has a different teaching style, there is going to be a mismatch. And so it even goes down into, and I swear I'm not going to do this because it's like it's going to throw me off of my research, but maybe there's another doctorate in the wings, but it's basically the way that the software is created and the way that the intuition is built in to learn it, that also should side with cultural relevance. And that takes a whole different aspect of how you design, not just designing for the user, but also specifically designing for particular cultural preferred learning styles. And so what I do in my program, and also just as an educator, because I teach as well. I have a DOE contract where I go in and design culturally relevant science curriculum in alternative schools so that those who are in the alternative schools can develop a sense of identity around science so that they can graduate. And so what it means to me is culture is, I'm not really taking it from an ethnic standpoint. I'm also really making inferences about there are shared experiences that students have within a particular culture. But it's important to ensure that the students understand the cultural artifacts that their particular group has, be it from the country that their ancestors may have come from, or the artifacts that are within the community in which they live. That those are important for those who are teaching students how to develop games, and for those who are developing games, to really understand who is going to be your audience and bring in some of that culture. So I had a debate yesterday with my son who was listening in on the conference call we had, because we were coming from our STEM camp, and he's 15. And he's really into Fortnite, not to try to publicize anything else here, but he was like, but mom, you can choose your skins, And I was just like, no, that's not what I mean. I'm going deeper than that. Well, of course we can choose our skins. Of course, in a classroom, you could have pictures of Katherine Johnson and say that you have a culturally relevant classroom. But I'm really going further into that, is really thinking of the design and making sure that outcomes, like anybody could game, but not everybody can because of the way they're taught how to develop the game. So I'm thinking if you make it a little bit more specific, then everybody could actually jump into that bandwagon.
It's funny, while you were talking, I was thinking about some of the, so I'm also back in school at Georgia Tech, and one of my focus is trying to pull in some of the newer technologies also with gaming. So I was actually talking to one of my colleagues about that, the intersection of deep learning. So I'm doing a lot with deep learning, gaming, and IoT. So all of that kind of comes together from a technology perspective. But in thinking about what you talked about in representation, right now, as I'm learning all these neural networks about deep learning models and all the other stuff that you guys probably don't care about, but what bothers me a little bit is that because we are not represented from culturally, and I mean persons of color across the board, when I'm looking at some of these things in AI and trying to infuse this into gaming, it won't pick up you or me, but maybe 30% of the time. It wouldn't pick up Patty, but maybe 40% of the time, because the people that are making these models don't look like us. And so as we start to infuse these types of deeper interfaces, it's really important that culturally everyone is represented. And of course, it's not just in gaming, it's across the board. So it's really good to hear you guys talk about that. So you mentioned in cultural representation design. So I want to kind of turn a curve a little bit. And Mary, I'm going to put you on the spot. Mary Martha, as you sit there, I'm going to put you with your cute shoes. We're going to put you on the spot.
Thank you.
We talked about, you're welcome. We talked about your game.
Yes.
How, in designing your game, let's talk about this for a minute. How does the design, you talked about how you got into building games and design and having this game that you're now featuring today out there. How does design reflect your experience? And how does your game that you have out there now, that design reflect what you channeled through some of the challenges? Can you talk about that design and how it reflects you and your experiences in building that game?
Wow, that was loaded.
It was. I got deep on you, didn't I?
So, what's the first question?
All right, see, we're going to put her off the stage. All right, so I just want to know, you talked about how your foray into game development happened, right? So how does the design of Ultimate Clapback, how does that design reflect your experience?
Oh my God. Well, I'll say this. The experience in developing a game, not being a gamer by trade, I moved really slow, or so I thought I was moving slow, until I learned that I actually was moving very fast. I think about my experience as, I don't know, if you ever want to do something, you just kind of got to do it. And so there was a lot of research with it, but then there were lots of times, I guess, I got frustrated in terms of access. to things that I didn't know, or going to other places and just like not knowing enough stuff. I don't think I'm answering your question.
Yeah, I don't think you are either. But
What do you want to
go
know
ahead.
about my experience, though? I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? What do you mean
Well,
about
just
my
like
experience in
so
terms
the
of
game that you spit out, your experiences and who you are.
Oh,
what
you mean like who I am in the game?
Yeah, your experiences. How did that shape the design of this?
Oh,
project?
because I was yelling at people all the time. I'm sorry. Let me go back. Do you all know what a clapback is? So for those that don't, a clapback is a response to something that someone says to you, right? So if I said tattoos are a lifetime of commitment, you could say too bad your marriage wasn't. If, that kind of stuff, right? So my experiences at the time is that that's what was going on in my life. My tongue was very sharp. So I decided to design a game around the fact that my tongue was sharp, but make it fun.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, now I want to play. So they wouldn't even
That's
know
what I mean.
it's
So
my
that
thing.
was my experience. And so who I am naturally as a person is in the game. And for me, going through this experience, I think that makes sense to be as authentic as to who you are. So like that makes sense for the game that you're making, right? It's pulling from your own experiences.
Absolutely.
Of who you are. So, I mean, I identify as a Black woman. My game, at the core of it, is a Black woman. Anyone can play, but it sounds like me.
I like it. Okay, so I'm ready
I answered the
to learn some more slap back. Okay, I'll be clapping. Okay, I got that. So Sean, you got to dig in here. You know, you got a bunch of women on the stage. We will hog the mic. Come on, man. You got to work with me. So can you tell us more? So you talked about your foray in the games, and it was non-traditional. Tell us more about. Well, I'm going to ask you two questions because you got to talk more than us. Now we got to get you in this. Tell us about building first non-traditional games, and then tell us also about your path into gaming that was very non-traditional.
Okay, well, building non-traditional games, I guess. I'm very slow when it comes to making games. And when it comes to making non-traditional games, I'm even slower because there's always the fear of, is this game even going to do anything? Because I make games for myself, to make because I enjoy it, but I also make games for other people to experience. Most of the games that I work on, they wouldn't work unless a lot of people actually got involved and played and participated, or just being loud and vocal. And
Sean, real quick, can you tell us, define, I realized I didn't ask you this first, define a non-traditional game first. I think we should, let me take a step back. Define that for us.
I mean, I guess the way I would do it, say, is just a game in a medium that normally doesn't, that a game usually isn't made in, I guess I would say. Normally not using a controller or using a screen or using a keyboard or a phone or pens and paper and tabletop pieces. So I mean, I would say the podcast game is a non-traditional type of game. There's interaction, but there's not a lot of immediate feedback when you're playing that game. So it's weird making these types of games because there's a lot of work going into it before I can even show off anything that's worth anything. For the podcast, I got to write the script, and I got to make the music, then I got to find people to record things, and I got to edit all of that, and then after all this work, I might wind up with 10 minutes of something that who knows if it's any good or not, and. So it's a really slow process, and I think about things way too much until I get to the point where I'm just frustrated and I just show whatever I have. It's not an exciting process, but it's fun once you see the final product and see people say, "Oh, that actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, Sean." And yeah. And sorry, the second question I forgot.
Where, if I wanted to play your podcast game and get involved in it, how would I do that? You're not going to include me? Hold up.
No,
what?
no.
I want to too.
It's just that this third episode is taking me forever to finish because of just people recording schedules. It's choicespodcast.com. And the first two episodes are out, and you can listen to it. You can't vote because the voting period closed. But the third episode will come out I don't know, hopefully within the next month. Yeah.
Okay, so how do we follow you to find that out now?
Oh, follow me on Twitter, Sean Pierre on Twitter, or like.
I'm trying to help you out. We're trying to play. You know,
I'm terrible
Come
at
on, man. I'm trying to help you.
Real humble.
Sean Pierre on Twitter, and then Choices Podcast also on Twitter, and choicespodcast.com is how you find that. All of it links together in the social web space.
Well, okay, Sean. Patty, let's talk about fantasy RPGs. First of all, just define that so we're all on the same page. And, they're not really known for being really, I guess, I'm trying to put this they're not known for being open and engaging to everyone, right? So talk about one, just kind of make sure we define a fantasy RPG for everyone in the room. I just like to make sure we baseline stuff. And then talk about, how your game is trying to change it to be more open and engaging and obviously representative of more cultures. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I'm definitely not a dictionary, but I guess a fantasy RPG, it's a classic that you could compare to would be Final Fantasy. So you got parties, you got your character party fighting a group of enemies, and you're keeping track of your health and your different stats, and the player tries to progress upwards and improve their skills so that they can fight progressively harder and harder monsters and bosses throughout the game. It's definitely for a certain type of person who loves to grind and really fight, but we've been working to make it, certainly difficulty levels in terms of for those who do want to try to play battles. We've also stripped our system down a little bit. So, for example, you're not going to be picking up armor or weapons. Instead, you're learning new spells or attacks that have different advantages. But we've recently decided in our design process that we will also be making a sort of opt-out for people who don't want to play the battles, and it becomes sort of like, okay, are you going to fight or are you going to learn? So they have the option to instead answer some cultural facts or questions that they will learn by speaking with different characters throughout the game. But with that said, I think it's okay to try to get non-RPG typical gamers to engage in something different, as long as you have good tutorials and good tips along the way.
Do you think that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, sorry. Yeah. When you said, non-RPG, so with this game, how is this game then being more engaging to like the non-gamer, right? Maybe, let's pretend that I wasn't in the games. I don't know, quote unquote, what Fourth Night is, and let's pretend I know nothing. But I'm like, oh, cool, I want to play your game. Do you think that the way you're approaching this game, or can you tell us how your approach, rather, at this game, is making it open to maybe non-gamers?
Sure. Without a doubt, I'm putting a lot of thought and time into really beefing up the narrative and making it an engaging journey for the player as they follow the main character, who's a little girl in a small rural village of the Philippines. And there's also sort of the exploration part of the game, in which she's called the Girl Who Sees because she gains this magical ability to see words over all objects in her space, and the words are in Tagalog. And so she meets a dwarf who has this weird ancient scroll, and they have to work together to translate. So there's a little bit of collecting items and completing quests for different characters throughout the game. And we're hoping to better highlight the different experiences of Filipinos during World War II by getting the main character to have to talk with people around the village.
Wow. So we're talking about building games and the different experiences and our approaches. I want to turn the corner a little bit and talk about what are some of the obstacles that you have faced. I can't talk today. I'm going to blame it on jet lag. What are some of those obstacles that you guys have faced in developing games or teaching games or engaging in the game industry? We know that the game industry can be very challenging for people that are outside of it. Can you tell us about your obstacles in being in the game industry, and how did you overcome them? So, how did you get past them?
That's what I was answering the first time.
But see, you weren't ready for me. You gotta wait for me.
I was
Okay.
already there.
Okay.
Okay. You want me to start?
You can go.
So the obstacles that I had outside of not knowing what it was that I was doing was lack of capital, right? So I know some people, correct me if I'm wrong, I know some people, like you said, like you make games for yourself, right? And so then I wanted to make a game that I wanted other people to experience. And in that, I just didn't know how much it cost. And now that I do know, it is really expensive. And so for me, that was the challenge, was figuring out how I was going to raise the money so that other people would be able to experience it. And then also just knowing how to showcase the game. I didn't know about all of these different like gaming events. Like this is a whole other culture. I was like, oh, PAX, what does that even stand for, right? Penny Arcade Expo. Okay, so then how do you do that? How do you go and, how? And so what I've realized, being the new person, why you don't see, so people said like, oh, when you go to these types of conferences, it's usually like a lot of white men. And then I went and I said, oh, because it costs so much, maybe, right? So you don't have that back. So how do you get there? So I figured out how I could get there, but it was still expensive. So that's my challenge. My challenge is money. Professionally, personally, it's just money. The city is expensive. That's a sidebar. Go ahead.
This is why I live in Atlanta, but okay. I love you guys, though. I'll visit. What about you guys? So, Yvonne, Patty, Sean, talk about some of the obstacles you had to face as a person of color, being engaging with the game industry, getting into the game industry, or tell us more about that. I'm gonna pick on you, Sean, just because don't Pat. You tried to pass the mic on me, Sean.
There's a lot of different challenges that I guess I come across with. Right now the thing I'm focusing on. I'll talk about Philly game mechanics. There's not a lot of diversity in the group that shows up. We want there to be a lot more. In the organizational team, we have a bunch of people in our organizational team, but it's mostly, we have, I think, it's close to 50-50 men, women, which was something we wanted, but we still don't have that showcased in the amount of people who show up. We have, I don't attend, but there's a ladies meetup for branched out of our group, but we don't have that going as often as we would like. That's been a challenge, just trying to increase the diversity of the people who show up and who come to events and who stay, because we've had problems in the past where someone would show up and they would not feel welcome because of things people would say or ways they would react about the games that they make, which is really disappointing and disheartening. And while we might have resolved those with the people who made the complaints or had the issues, it's not something we want. So that's been really challenging. How to get different type of people to show up and and make sure that the games they want to make are welcome to everybody. And then just trying to get people to feel like they can do it too. That's been a challenge. There's a lot of people who they're hobbyists now. A lot of people are hobbyists, and we want people who want to move on from that to move on from that. And there's a challenge. How do you get to these shows? How do you put your games online? What do I even need to make this piece of code work? So that's been a big challenge. It's something we're working on. I'm not even sure if we fixed it, but getting there, getting places.
Patty, Yvonne.
So I've kind of been hearing it from some of us on the stage, but I would say imposter syndrome is kind of something that's always within me. Coming from outside of the AAA space or anything like that, trying to figure out what are the standards of game production so that you can meet those standards and be a good manager to your team. How do I make sure that that sounds like what I should pay them, but is that the industry standard, and most times I realize I can't even meet that, and we fall into this cycle of game devers of color, accepting lesser pay just because we want to get our projects done. And unfortunately, I'm part of that problem, I guess you could say. But the other thing I would say is just learning how to delegate and make sure that you're giving yourself some credit for what you're doing. And even if you're a hobbyist, you're still making things and you're creating something, and just the fact that you're creating something is worth celebrating. And so I think those are two big issues that I see commonly.
When I was growing up, the main obstacle I would face would be having to convince the teacher that my design of something or my thought idea was worth considering. And what I meant by that is, a lot of times teachers have a preconceived notion of what kids can do. And when my ideas would come out of the woodwork related to this very basic program or game that I would want to create, I would get these like, well, why don't you think about this? This might take a long time. And so I had to sort of tune myself out to the point of just ignoring, because I came from a household where my father told me I could do anything that I put if I put my mind to it. So that's what I believed. And sometimes, just interesting enough, I oftentimes made the simple game for the teacher, and I kept on with my project. And I'm glad that I did, because I'm a kind of go against the grain type of person, and I'm glad that I had enough confidence in myself and I had enough support at home so that I wouldn't have to kind of go out there in the world thinking that I had to be small. So then fast forward into, as an educator who has a company that makes darn sure that our kids have access to the knowledge of knowing how to code, the knowledge of engineering, because we teach kids coding, engineering, science, robotics, creating virtual reality experiences so that they can throw them up on the VR and look at what they make. And then this year, it's creating a visual programming game. So there's a company that's a year-old startup that gave us the software for free, and we're going to teach our kids this visual programming game or visual programming code so that they can create apps that can be uploaded to the App Store. So what I'm trying to do is basically, in order to prevent any of my students from feeling like they don't matter or feeling like they can't do it, is really also showing them how to kind of monetize things and get out to market. So we do a lot of showcasing where they have to present what they're doing, whether it's presenting their wireframe, presenting their drafts, presenting their code or program that they made. And it's a practice that's already built into the curriculum so that they will never feel nervous, if you will. Like I always say, always on interview. You never know when that VC is coming, because I have startup companies always coming into my program to volunteer. And so I really insist that we build a whole program around when they come in so that the people from the tech firm understand why they're coming in, because they can't just come in and just do a give back and check off the list that I volunteered in Harlem. Well, no, you have to we're going to really put some thought into it, that we're going to go through ideation to wireframing to development of prototype and presentation, just like what you do in your company. And so that so both sides can get something from what we're supposed to do. So the obstacle that I come across specifically is finding the right teacher. I tend to have to go to universities or go to the professional industries to find the teacher, because there's no such thing as a certified engineering teacher K through 12, right? They're not here in the United States. So I have to really then go and take that person and kind of show them how to kind of have my own Teach for America program to build them up and take them from learning how to deal with classroom behavior, to really understanding that they're only 6, so please don't think that they can come in and start learning Python. It's not going to happen. It's just not. I don't care how bright you are. And so, so those are the obstacles that I have, is really finding the right people that can I always have to ask, well, when did you start learning how to code? And most people have started learning how to code when they're in high school. So then I have to say, guess what? You are going to be like this revolutionary person that's going to teach a 6-year-old how to program, and their eyes light up like, whoa, what did I get myself into? But then like, whoa, this is going to be freaking awesome, because it is something to see a child understand what an algorithm is, because we've developed games where they're moving around and they are doing the algorithm, but they feel like it's like Simon Says game, but no, they're doing if, then, and else games to build that layer in. So I think just the one obstacle I already shared, overcame it, whatever, like that's what you have to do in the world. And then the obstacles that I have, I purposely build it into my program that my children don't see those obstacles, simply because it's a given that you're a coder. It's a given that you're an engineer. Like, this is what you do. So that when they go out into the world, they already have that identity.
So I know we have to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for being on stage. I hope to connect with all of you. And Vaughn, I guess I need to come to Harlem and help with the coding. What really final words in our last minute? We literally are down to our last minute. Just could you just give inspiration? You got a bunch of people here that are probably really interested in game dev. Just one brief sentence of inspiring them to dig in and go into this crazy world of the game industry. Our last seconds, quickly, anybody?
You have to be an active participant.
All right.
I would say do it anyway and market the heck out of social media. You never know who's watching. Get those followers, and that's how you get your money.
I would say that everybody has talents, even if you don't code or you're not an artist. There is a way to help have you help make a game happen, and so you should just go for it.
I would say take care of yourself, mentally, physically. Just take care of yourself.
All right. Thanks, guys, so much.
Thank you.